the whole Chargers thing is really funny. I just was thinking
What
about
whole
that.
Chargers thing?
Well, I mean, what do you think? I mean,
Them?
the whole Chargers thing,
Just
exactly.
them?
Like, I mean, like,
Yeah, sure.
yeah. I mean, like
That's
they're
good.
they're picking fifth in the draft.
The
They
whole
fucking
Chargers thing.
they got one of the Harbaughs, Jim
You're
or
going to struggle with
John.
that, aren't you?
I
I'm
mean,
really surprised you struggle with that.
probably I won't
Well, yeah,
once
after once one of
he's
them's a
actually
division
in the
rival
league,
that.
but like,
But I mean, we've been playing John Harbaugh for once a year for
yeah,
a
but like
while now.
only like
How
once
does
a
it not
year,
set in
and
that guy's John? I
I don't
guess
know.
John
That's a
and
good
Jim are too
question.
similar. If
I
they
think it's
were John
because
and
yeah,
Tim,
I think it's that, and I think
maybe
it's
you should start
also
calling him
that
Tim Harbaugh.
I actually that's good. I actually think it's also because I mean I think the fact that there's two of them in there in the NFL now is what's confusing because before there was essentially only one Harbaugh in my
There
mind, and it was
was.
John
And did you
because
never called the Ravens coach Jim by accident, right? You always
I
knew
don't
the
know,
Harbaugh in the
well,
NFL.
I don't know,
There
maybe it's
must
possible.
always be one.
It's
And
possible, but I think in my mind when Jim Harbaugh was coaching in college, it's like he didn't exist because I don't watch college football.
sure, he
It's
didn't
like,
exist.
so it might as well just be one guy, and it was obviously,
Jay Harbaugh.
yeah, Jay Harbaugh. It was obviously John, and now we got Jim out in the West. Welcome in to It's Always Sunny in Chiefs Kingdom. I'm Austin. Find me on Twitter /X at Real Bird Lawyer, on Blue Sky at Bird Law Expert. Here with me, as always, my co-host Taylor at Taylor_Wood on Twitter /X, on Blue Sky at Taylor M Witt. What is going on, buddy?
Quite a bit. And nothing at the same time. It feels like we haven't done a normal pod where we talk about normal emotions and normal things, and it's been the chaos of the playoffs and guests and the Super Bowl run and all that. Now we just kind of we're back to business.
Yeah, this is going to be right down the middle America, Randy Newman type shit. We got news, and we got a Super Bowl recap. And we are going to do our traditional game recap. For those of you who have not listened to either the Emergency podcast or our recap with Randy Jazerli from The Ringer, please go listen to those. They are A+ content. It's always a pleasure to talk to Randy. It's been so much fun bringing him on the show, and just has been an absolute privilege for us. So we are going to have him back on over the off season. But if you have not checked it out already, definitely go back and listen to those episodes either right now before you finish listening to this or afterwards, whenever you want to do it. But that will be, that Randy brings his own unique flair to the show. But now we are back to what we do. We're going to get into one final, recap show following our usual routine, the numbers, the figures, the chief system, the awards. And then, next week it'll be off-season content. We'll talk about that a little bit more here at the end. So it's going to be a good time.
It is. It's going to be a lot of fun. The off season after you win a Super Bowl, there's nothing like it. It's the shortest off season you can have, which we've talked about. We talked about it last year. We talked about it, in 2020, where it's so much better to be drafting 32 than any other slot, and not because you traded it, because you earned it. Before we get into the show, I do want to also do a plug. We haven't done any plugs, or at least not any in a while. And I had an artist, a Rams artist, reach out to me on Twitter and say, "Hey, I just made this Patrick Mahomes pin. Do you think you could help me spread the word and get some people in Chiefs Kingdom to take a look at it?" And I got to say, it's freaking dope. He is really, really a talented artist. It's a half Mahomes, half Reaper, like a 2-inch by 2-inch pin, and it's got him holding a picture, a helmet, severed head of a 49er. That's what it is, and really, really cool stuff.
Wow.
So it's his name is Prominent Kings, is the shop. But if you want to get this thing, definitely use promo code Sunny to get 10% off, which I will tweet about and link it out and do all that stuff. So just look at my Twitter account if you want this pin, but it's $12. And so with the 10% off, you get it for, a little under 11 and totally worth it. I know everybody out there is looking for merch, looking for cool Mahomes stuff. This is a very unique opportunity. And I think my guy does great work. So check out my Twitter page after you see this episode, and it's going to be on the show tweet.
Yeah, on that note, before we get into the show, if any of our listeners have merch that they want to share with us, we would be happy to represent that on the show. One of the things that I love about winning the Super Bowl, one of the many, many, many things, is like I just love buying new Chiefs merchandise.
Right,
I
me
am
too.
very
Addicted.
excited. Yeah, I mean, like I'm going to spend an unreasonable and irresponsible amount of money on Super Bowl merch. I got a hoodie at the Shields next to where I live here in Colorado that, has Super Bowl champions. It's in like a Vegas style, with the neon lights on it. It's a very classy affair. I got one at the Hy-Vee in Kansas City before I came back here to Colorado that said, what happens in Vegas stays in Kansas City, which I love. Again, with sort of a Vegas motif. I'm really looking forward to what the artists and merchandisers of Chiefs Kingdom have to share. And if you guys want to share it and have us promote it on the show, we'd be happy to do that. Let's get into the news. Oh my God, we have transaction news. What is happening? It's February 22nd. We are literally in the off season. It has been a little over a week since the Chiefs won their second Super Bowl back-to-back. And the Chiefs have made a move. They signed the punt god, Matt Araiza. Ariza? How do you say it?
I think Araiza. I think with the second A makes it Araiza, yeah.
All right. For those of you unfamiliar with him, he was originally a 6th-round pick of the Buffalo Bills. Punt God is a nickname that he earned in college, and I do say earned because he was bombing the ball like 80 yards as a punter. 6th-round pick of the Buffalo Bills. He was released after sexual assault allegations, which fortunately have since been debunked. And I do not use that word lightly, as many of you listeners of the show know. I've been a district attorney and prosecutor before, still work in that field, and I'm always very wary and uncomfortable about saying something's been debunked or it's been disproved. I feel comfortable saying it in this case because there's been an extensive investigation. There were never criminal charges filed. A civil lawsuit was dropped. So he has been essentially exonerated of any misconduct, and he is going to be the Chiefs' new punter in 2024.
Yeah, it's exciting news to me. I know there are people out there that are uncomfortable with the signing just based on the general aura of drama. Like, people just say, well, why don't you just go ahead and stay away from a guy even if he was exonerated? Because that's unfair. That's not really how the world works. He should get another opportunity to kick in the NFL. And if he's going to get an opportunity with a team, it might as well be with us because he's a really, really good punter. Has a cannon for a leg. As you said, he led the NCAA in net yards per punt, or in gross yards per punt in 2021, and was 3rd in net yards. So he not only can bomb them, but does
got to learn how to control that cannon a little bit.
He does tend to overkick a little bit, but I would rather have a guy that punts too far that you can kind of try and hone that in than a guy that can't get it there. I mean, and the other thing is, if the Chiefs are past the 50, like that's not punt territory, that's field goal territory with Butker. We'll get to him obviously more later, but I want a guy that can flip the field. And so I'm really excited about Araiza. I really think anybody that's uncomfortable with this needs to look into what the findings have been, both through the university and through San Diego police. And there's a really great Yahoo write-up on the whole thing and what was found. And I mean, it was very obvious that what was being alleged there is not what actually happened. So I think everyone should welcome Matt Araiza into Chiefs Kingdom with open arms.
It's probably an appropriate time, and obviously this hasn't become official yet, but probably signals the Chiefs moving on from Tommy Townsend, which, I have mixed feelings about. A punter is not, it's rare that a punter becomes, part of the fiber of the team. Obviously, Dustin Colquitt was, because he was the Chiefs punter for 18 seasons or whatever it was, and was a 3rd-round draft pick of the organization, the longest tenured Chief for a long time. Tommy has had a good run, a two-time Super Bowl champion, and I I would say, an up and down career on the field as a Chief, but certainly had his ups. And,
First
I
team All Pro
think
last year.
exactly. And when you look at especially what he was able to do, we've talked about this on the show before, but what he was able to do as a holder for Harrison Butker this season with the season that Butker had, you know, the 57-yarder in the Super Bowl, everybody knows this. I'm not giving you new information here, but it wasn't a good snap. And
No,
it took a great effort by Tommy Townsend to get that hold down to a point where Butker was able to kick it through. And obviously it was a hell of a kick, and Butker deserves a ton of credit for that. But Tommy deserves some credit too. And it is always a little bit of a challenge when you have a kicker who's performing at a really high level to bring in a new guy. I'm sure Matt Araiza will work to be proficient, just as Tommy had to work, because it was not always pretty. Obviously, we know last season that there were some struggles between him and Butker, and in fact, Dustin Colquitt was calling out Tommy on social media. So, but it is worth acknowledging Tommy Townsend, Legolas, his time in Kansas City, and we wish him the best.
We do nothing but the best for our guy. He was awesome. Really good culture fit with Kansas City too. Clearly everybody liked him. This might not signal the end of Townsend. Maybe they get Araiza in for a workout and they get a decent deal done. The other thing about punters is, everyone keeps saying like, oh, well, that's because Tommy's going to want a bag. But the difference between the lowest paid and highest paid punters is like $5 million in the NFL. Like they don't get bags. They're not allowed. They're not allowed to get bags. So it's entirely within reason that they brought him in to maybe light a fire under Tommy's ass and get some competition going. But at the end of the day, Tommy might still stick with the team. But if he is gone, sayonara. It was great to have you. And thanks for the Super Bowls.
Speaking of well-wishing, Charles Omenihu had successful surgery on his ACL. So we'll have to see, obviously, as his recovery progresses, what that timeline is going to look like. Since he tore it in the AFC Championship game, that's obviously the second to last game of the year that anyone is playing in. It's a hard road for recovery, but it sounds like the surgery was successful and he will be on the mend.
Yeah, big fan of Chuck. Really brought a ton of juice to the defensive line. You could tell the difference from when he was not in the game or when he wasn't with the team in the first 6 weeks to when he started getting after it. I mean, he's a game changer. Yeah, you saw it on the strip sack of Lamar and many other big plays that he had this year. So really hope that he recovers quickly. Like you said, it was a late injury, which means it's going to be a late start to next year. You hope that if he can maybe turn it around in 10 months, which is decently predictable, then that's 2 months before the AFC Championship game. Still gives you a good, 7 or 8 games before the end of the year. So that would be a big boost whenever he does come back. And if he comes back healthy, the Chiefs are really going to enjoy having him, kind of like a trade deadline acquisition. Like that's not the worst thing in the world.
ESPN's Jeremy Fowler expects the Chiefs to decline Kadarius Toney's 5th-year option. I almost didn't put this in here because I feel like this is so obvious as not to constitute news, but it is the calm before the storm in the offseason. And so, I wanted to run down the tiniest little bits of what could potentially be considered news for our listeners. I do think this decision is not going to be particularly interesting, but it will be interesting to see if Kadarius Toney is on the team next year, if Sky Moore is on the team next year, if Marquez Valdes-Scantling is on the team next year. All of those guys sort of have legitimate reasons why the Chiefs may not be interested in bringing them back. I think Toney is the easiest one to justify moving on from a off-field perspective. But from a talent perspective, there's obviously still a lot of talent there. Not a huge surprise there, but something to monitor going forward.
I kind of feel the opposite on the on-field versus off-field. To me, off-field Kadarius Toney hasn't really been that big of a deal as far as negative towards the team or whatever. Like, I haven't really heard of too much. Like, the players and coaches all seem to love him. He had the one little Instagram dust up or whatever, which turns out to have been probably talking about the Giants and not the Chiefs. But like, what else off the field has really gone on with him?
I mean, that would not be the first time that he's made some questionable remarks on social media. You know,
That's
he
true. He had
he
the
did,
DMs.
yeah, he had the DMs. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
was
mean,
that pre-Chiefs? The
it
DMs?
was after he was
I don't
traded to the
remember.
Chiefs that
Okay.
he was dealing with
Okay.
Giants fans in his DMs, and
But I think more what I want to push back, or not push back, but what I
sure, no,
want
that's
to
fair.
point out is that on the field, I'm not a huge fan of what Tony brought to the
I get
Chiefs. I don't think that he was the player that he was touted to be.
But he caught the ball after adjusting his gloves in the air,
he had some really cool moments.
and
He
his
did.
first game with the Chiefs.
Yes, yeah, I know. And he had the Jaguars game. We'll always have the Jaguars game with the mossing of the player and the, you know, all the cool stuff he did there. It just, and part of the on-field frustration is that he was not on the field a lot. Like
fair.
his injury status is not something that I would consider to be like an off-field problem, like a non-football problem. I consider
Sure.
off-field
No,
to be like
Right.
non-football. And like dude's just not healthy. And at a certain point, you just have to build in him missing 8+ games every year. That's not worth getting a guy on the roster for it. So I'm okay with not seeing Kadarius Toney as a Chief again. I mean, if they do, then maybe they can finally figure it out. And of course, he probably is going to end up going somewhere and eventually exploding and eventually having a really good year, maybe. And if he does, then, you know, so be it.
Good for him, 2-time Super Bowl champion. So, you know,
That's
nobody
right.
can ever
Positive
take
vibes.
that away from Kadarius Toney. One final news item: Dan Graziano, also of ESPN, reports that the Chiefs are expected to restructure Mahomes' contract, which normally isn't news because we sort of have expected the Chiefs to do this every year, but they actually didn't do it last year, resulting in him being the highest single cap hit in the NFL last season, and then he just, you know, won the Super Bowl anyway. But they are expected to restructure Mahomes' contract this year. They can free up to $35 million in cap space. Obviously, free agency, I mean, we're recording this on February 22nd. Free agency starts in mid-March. So would expect the Chiefs to make that move before free agency starts, so they have that money to play around with. But it is interesting just to see that the Chiefs have already kind of decided, yeah, because last year they didn't do it. This year they've already decided maybe we'll free up some of that money before free agency.
Well, really interesting decision. First of all, 35 million is a shitload in cap space.
Yeah, it is a lot.
That's more than one superstar player. Like that
and
is
it's also, we don't know what the cap number is going to be, but it might be up to $250 million. I mean, that's almost
it's
going to
move upward. Yes, exactly. And the Chiefs currently have roughly 20 million, depending on, you know, where you're at with the numbers or whatever, but they already are under the cap. And so to be able to free up additional money, to me, signals that Brett Veach is interested in, if not fully in, on getting a superstar wide receiver, getting one of the big Mike Evans or, you know, others, because that kind of money isn't really needed in another position on the field other than the two defensive superstars that the Chiefs are going to try and re-sign. Snead and Jones. And if the Chiefs can bag Snead and Jones, and then, I mean, I guess you'd have to do some crunching to figure out exactly what that would leave them with. But
sure, I don't think, like, I think it's, we'll talk about this in more detail when we get to free agency. But like,
yes,
I think doing two of those three options is completely doable with the cap that they have. I mean,
big wide receiver and one of the
defenders, bring back Jones and Snead, or you bring back one of those two guys and you go sign Mike Evans. Like, I think that's completely feasible. And then they have obviously the draft to add to whichever one of those three positions they don't, you know, spend big on in free agency. But I do think that it's significant that they have already sort of earmarked this money. And I've already talked to Patrick about it. I mean, it's a ton of money. And if you look at the other AFC contenders, we will talk about this in a subsequent episode because we're still focused on us. Yeah, there will be a lot of time over the offseason to clown the rest of the AFC for all of their buffoonery that they've been committing over the last couple of months while we've been winning back-to-back Super Bowls.
The last couple of years. They've gone all in. A lot of them have gone all in 2 years in a row and have nothing to show for it.
Yeah, we'll discuss this in more detail in a future episode. But yes, it is going to be exciting to see what the Chiefs do with that money. In other news, just very briefly, little blurb: Travis Kelce in Australia, down under, for his Eras Tour era, starting tomorrow. Taylor Swift will be, by the time you listen to this episode, the Friday show will already taken place because they're like a day ahead of us, 18 hours ahead of us.
Wow.
So it's going to be fun to see that content. I know we talked about this last offseason, how much fun it was to win a non-COVID Super Bowl and get to experience the pageantry of all of our guys being in the news for an entire offseason. And this, to me, Travis taking his private jet to Australia to soak in the Eras Tour with his billionaire superstar girlfriend, Taylor Swift. This, to me, is the kickoff of off-season content. I mean, like,
Yeah.
This is just a prelude of everything to come. The charity golf tournaments, which they've already done one of those as well. Maybe another appearance on SNL, the late night shows, the White House visit, all of that stuff. This is where it all starts.
Yeah, they're like at the pinnacle of American sports consumerism for an athlete or a group of athletes. Like specifically Mahomes and Kelsey are as in the eye of the storm of this stuff as it gets, and they love every second of it, and they deserve it. And for all the people that hate on them for it, that think they're in it too much, that have all the, the haters just fuel the fire to me. They're just the more people that say that the NFL should get away from the Chiefs, the more I get tickled by all the I mean, think about like the cover of Madden coming up. Like Mahomes has already been on it twice. And like, how do you not have a Chief, either Kelsey?
Should probably be Travis with like Taylor cheering him on in the corner. So you get Taylor on the cover.
I've seen some good photoshops of Madden 26 just being Taylor Swift, just at a concert. And that's just like, I mean, she's a good cover athlete. But yeah, I just think that their current level of exposure is something that not a lot of athletes have ever gone through. I mean, the GOATs certainly have, your Jordans and LeBrons and
they kind of have. But I mean, we talked about this before, but
time.
I mean, Michael Jordan, there was no social media when Michael Jordan was doing his thing. And obviously, I'm not saying that Michael Jordan was not experiencing an incredible level of fame, or Tiger Woods or Tom Brady.
Right.
But we are in the peak of the social media era, and these are the most famous football players, in the TikTok X era of,
and the NFL dominates. So they're the most famous football players, but that's the top of the top as far as American sports goes.
Right.
I mean, clearly soccer superstars have their own level of fame that it's a little bit more worldly than the NFL is, but not much. I mean, it's a huge deal, and it's our guys right in the middle of it. It's a lot of fun.
I saw that the Super Bowl viewership for the UK was up by like 350% this year over last year.
Amazing.
So it is becoming an international phenomenon, and the Chiefs are on the cutting edge of that. And you know what? Listen, Travis Kelce is carrying that to Australia. He is our ambassador of the Kansas City Chiefs, Chiefs Kingdom, and the NFL to the land down under. It's going to be exciting to see how that plays out.
Ask him to sing any Garth Brooks while he's there.
Hopefully not. Let's recap this game. Let's do what we do. Super Bowl 58, Chiefs 25, Niners 22 in overtime. I mean, we've already said a lot about this game, but we now have a structure. We have a format that we like to follow on the show. And I guess let's kick it off with the numbers, the figures.
We're going to start off with a Harrison Butker stat, because Harrison Butker has been incredible. The Chiefs tweeted out earlier today, you could call him Mr. Perfect, because he hit every playoff kick, both extra points and field goals this year, which was great and much needed in some close games and some big kicks. And I mean, this guy has just come through time and time again. And the figure on Harry is that he now has the most playoff field goals of 50 yards or greater in NFL history, with 6 of them. He is 6-1 on kicks of 50 plus yards in playoff games. I mean, that number is just mind numbing to think about, just how big all of those kicks have been. I mean, we're talking about, AFC championship kicks, and the 13 seconds kick was a 49-yard bomb. That wasn't even one of these 50s, but it was right up there. He is 6-1.
The game winner in the AFC championship game wasn't even a 50-yarder, but I mean,
it wasn't, but it was a mega monster kick. Exactly. Vinatieri's 5-2 in 50-yarders, and Robbie Gould and Matt Prater are the only other guys with 4. So he's sitting there at 6, and then there's only 3 other guys that have 4 or more. So he's he just houses 50-yard field goals and all other field goals. He's been field goals made in the playoffs. He is 4th all time with 32.
It's crazy.
Just insane. He's amazing.
It's crazy because he's also 28 years old, and like you just think about what he
Yes.
could continue to do if he remains in Kansas City for the rest of his career. I mean, he will shatter every postseason kicking record known to man. And I mean, to your point, I mean, we're talking about a 3-point game, a 7-point game, and a 3-point game.
Yeah. Right.
In the Chiefs' last 3 playoff games, the divisional, the championship round, and the Super Bowl. That's 3 one-possession games to win a championship, and you really got to be perfect in those situations, and he was.
Not to mention a blocked kick, a blocked extra point in the Super Bowl, and a shanked game-tying kick in the divisional round.
Right,
So, like,
right.
you know, I mean, his counterparts weren't doing it, and I mean, just a huge shout out to that guy.
We got one from Scott Kaxmar, who always has good stuff. This is postseasons with 100 plus pass attempts and a 100 plus passer rating, and then the number of rings that this player won doing this. In NFL history, Patrick Mahomes has 4 postseasons. Now, keep in mind, he's played in 6 postseasons. 4 postseasons with 100 plus pass attempts and a 100 plus passer rating over 100 for the playoffs. He has 4, and he's won 3 rings doing that. So, I mean, 4 seasons out of 6 years as a starter, 6 postseason appearances, 4 with a passer rating over 100, with 100 plus pass attempts. Which, to get 100 plus pass attempts in the playoffs, you're winning multiple playoff games. Let's look at the rest of this list, because what are we comparing it to? I already told you Mahomes is number 1. Tom Brady is 2nd. Okay, Tom Brady went to the postseason like 17 times off the top of my head. 18 times.
I think it was 19 because with the Bucks run, he went twice with the Bucks, and I think 17 with the Pats. I think that's right.
He had 3 postseasons in his career with 100 plus pass attempts and a passer rating over 100 for the playoffs. So 1 fewer than Patrick Mahomes in like 3 times as many postseason appearances. Yeah. And he won a ring doing that 1 time. Kurt Warner did it twice. Drew Brees did it twice. Aaron Rodgers did it twice. Each of them won 1 ring when they did it. So Mahomes has won as many rings as the next 3 guys combined, and he has
3 out of the 7 total.
More postseasons with 100 plus pass attempts and a passer rating over 100 than anyone in NFL history. And he's been a starter for 6 years. Unbelievable.
He is. He's unbelievable. He shatters every record, including the next one. Most NFL playoff passing touchdowns before their 29th birthday.
This is absurd.
Patrick Mahomes is number 1, of course, with 41. But the crazy part is the next highest ever NFL playoff touchdowns before their 29th birthday. Mahomes 41, 2nd place Brett Favre 23.
That's crazy.
He is 18 above 2nd place in this list.
And almost double. I mean, literally the 4th guy on this list is Russell Wilson. He has 20. So Mahomes is literally double 4th place on this list.
Crazy. And of course, he'll turn 29 in September. So you can keep stretching this out every year.
Sure, to 30, 31.
Yes, whatever year he's going to be at, he is going to dominate this list. It's crazy.
He's going to be lapping the field. I pulled this stat this morning, and I'm really proud of it. I need to go back and check the quote tweets, because I know that there's got to be like 8 or 9 quote tweets from people that I've already muted that I've never seen, because I don't get the notifications, because they're Brady stands and they're on mute. But Tom Brady had a guy who was not good enough to earn a single offensive snap for him in the playoffs when he captained Tampa's Super Bowl winning team in 2020, the 2021 Super Bowl. That was Justin Watson. He appeared in 1 game in the playoffs, and he appeared on special teams only. And here's the fun part. He was Patrick Mahomes' 3rd leading receiver in Super Bowl 58. Yep. The guy that could not get on the field as a wide receiver for Tom Brady the last time he won a Super Bowl. Yeah, that was Mahomes' wide receiver 3 in the Super Bowl that he won. It's
crazy what happens when one team has AB, Godwin, and Evans,
and Gronk,
and Gronk, and the
Cameron Brate, and just it is crazy. One final one here, really quick. You may have heard this or seen this around. This is Super Bowl titles by teams in the AFC West. In last place, the Chargers 0. In second to last place, the Raiders with 3, and tied with them, the Broncos also with 3. And then in not last place, in fact, in first place, it's the Kansas City Chiefs They have
Mm.
4. We have the most division titles. We have the most Super Bowl titles. Neither of those things were remotely close to being true 6 years ago.
No,
Here we
not even
are.
close. I love the presentation of last and tied for second to last for all three of those
Correct.
teams.
That's correct.
That's exactly how they need to be considered, because all of them are, as we will get into the offseason, in a world of despair. They're all in bad shape, and the Chiefs are in the opposite of bad shape. They are in the best shape you can possibly be in.
We've already started doing this on social media, of course, because that's just the nature of the medium. Is, the goal is to be as toxic as possible. We will eventually get there with the podcast. That is sort of a staple of our offseason content, to just rip these other teams. But we have to celebrate us first. People will accuse us of not enjoying our Super Bowl win. Obviously, they don't understand that dominating everyone else and putting them in the dirt is part of celebrating our Super Bowl win.
It's a big part.
But we will definitely get around to dunking all over these other teams in the AFC West throughout the offseason. Before we do that, let's get to the Chief system. This is your baby. I will let you describe it to the listeners.
The Chief system, of course, is the system that the Chiefs always employ when they arrive victorious at the end of an NFL football game. That is derived from the Dennis system from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, our namesake TV show. Of course, it's a acronym that stands for Create Drama, Handle Adversity, Inspire Hope, Engage Physically, Finish Strong, and Separate Entirely. And boy, this game was it was a Chief system for the ages. We'll start off with the C, of course. Create drama. Pretty hard to do in the Super Bowl. Not really. It was as if the Super Bowl wasn't enough, as if the drama of the moment and the rematch with the Niners and everything that went into being in the Super Bowl, if that drama wasn't enough drama for you, they created more drama once this game started. They once again found themselves down 10 in the Super Bowl for the 4th time in the last 5 years. Is it really drama if they do it every year? I don't know. I guess in this point, it sure felt like drama to us. They looked like they would take an early 7-3 lead after there was a 52-yard bomb to Mecole Hardman, set him up at the 9. But of course, as we all know, Isaiah Pacheco fumbled the next play, and then the Niners hit the double pass touchdown from MVP Juwan Jennings. I say MVP, but I mean, he really was there. He was incredible this game. And
he was great.
From Juwan Jennings to CMC to take an early 10-0 lead. We have seen this before. And in fact, Super Bowl 4 remains the only one of the Chiefs' 6 Super Bowl appearances where they were not down 10 at any point. And they are, of course, 4-2 in those Super Bowls. Drama created. You and I were watching over at our buddy's house when you came into Kansas City for the Super Bowl. We were a mess early on in this game, as you would expect. Just a lot of drama. There's a lot. The drama of the Super Bowl is unlike any drama in any sports event ever. I mean, it's too much. It's too much at times. What do you think of how much drama the Chiefs created?
I mean, what I am always fascinated by when we watch the Super Bowl is how time ceases to make any sense, and it just doesn't.
Totally.
You'll look up and it'll be halftime. And you'll be like, that took 5 minutes of my life. And then the halftime show will last 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then the fourth quarter will last 4 hours.
Yes.
And it just, nothing makes any sense about it. So I think that really,
I agree.
that heightens the sense of drama. Of course, your rational brain is being listen, it's the first quarter and we're down 10-0. We literally have come back from down 10 in the fourth quarter against this very team in the Super Bowl, right? Chill out, bro. But the other part of your brain is oh my God, we're down 10-0 and there's no time left in this game. This game's already over. It's
already happened.
It's done so. We're screwed. I thought, to me, what made the start of this game so frustrating and upsetting was obviously I had a lot of confidence in the defense, and that was validated. But even though they weren't allowing a lot of points, they did get gashed the first couple of drives in this game.
Yes.
And on the flip side, I really expected the Chiefs to be able to move the ball, and they did nothing in the first half. Really, almost nothing at all, except for you mentioned obviously the 52-yard bomb to Hardman that set them up, but then they promptly fumbled, and that was classic 2023 Chiefs. And it really felt like, for a minute there, like we've not voiced this thought very often because we like to, in general, embody positivity on this podcast, except when it comes to other teams. Obviously, just about the Chiefs themselves, we like to maintain a sunny disposition. That's what the show is all about. But I mean, I had convinced myself that the 2023 Chiefs were gone and buried, and 2024 Chiefs were akin to the Chiefs that we've been watching for 5 years, and that this offense was going to move the ball. And they were not moving the ball. And when they did move the ball, they promptly turned it over. And that's pretty dramatic, if I'm being honest. It was dramatic and not in a good way. It was upsetting.
Yeah, it was exasperating. And I mean, the other thing is, if the Chiefs had not played 3 games before that where they didn't look like this, if the Chiefs had started the playoffs against the Dolphins, let's say, and looked the way they looked in this first half, I wouldn't even have been that upset about it. I would have been like, yeah, that's this team. They don't move the ball. They're not very good, on offense especially, but like they had been moving the ball on great teams, and Buffalo and Baltimore were certainly more hostile and harder situations for them to move the ball than a neutral field against a struggling, what we thought was struggling 49ers defense. And let's give them some credit here. They played their asses off, especially early in this game. And I think it kind of cost them. I think they kind of cooked their own goose a little bit there, but like they came out of this thing possessed. So
a little too hot.
Chiefs, a little too hot, maybe. The Chiefs go from creating drama to doing what they do all the time, which is handle adversity. There was certainly a lot of adversity to handle on this one. I don't know what our adversity career maximum is, but this one's got to be pretty close.
Sure.
We'll start with the field goal drive that immediately followed the double pass Christian McCaffrey touchdown. There was a 3rd and 9 conversion to Justin Watson on that drive that kept the drive alive, and then a later 3rd and 2 pass to Rashee Rice for a couple yards that kept the drive alive, and then unfortunately on 3rd and 5 from the 9 with 30 seconds to go in the second quarter, Mahomes was sacked. He was running around kind of looking for a guy in the end zone and didn't find anything he liked. And the Chiefs settled for a short field goal, but they would get the ball to start the 3rd quarter. And so after the way the first half had gone, I thought it was insane that they were only down 3 and would get the ball coming out of half, despite being thoroughly, what I thought, outplayed in the entire first half. And yes, you're right that the first half flew by, but at the same time, getting the ball down 7 after those drives to start the game, I felt like the Chiefs would go into the second half with some pretty positive momentum.
Sure, of course. And I mean, this drive to end the half was a really encouraging drive. I mean, this is the quintessential handle adversity drive, because it was 13 plays, 4 minutes, 65 yards. They ran on the other 4 drives of the first half combined 15 plays. So 3 plays, 4 plays, 5 plays, and 3 plays. That is, I mean, and for a total of 6 yards, 10 yards, 66, and -3 yards. So they essentially on this
52 on one play.
Right. And they essentially moved the ball better on this drive than they had on every other drive the first half combined. Obviously, they couldn't punch it in. It did feel to me a little bit like, I know this is handle adversity, which is meant to be a positive. It did feel a little bit like the AFC Championship game against the Bengals, except they kicked the field goal. And that was at least like, you're driving, you're trying to get a touchdown before the end of the half. You don't get it. You come up just a little bit short. The execution isn't there at the very end of the half. And let's not forget, the Chiefs were great at end of half scoring this year. That was like the only thing that they were completely elite at. They were the best team in the league at the end of the first half in scoring. And they couldn't put a touchdown on the board, but at least being able to move the ball and get points on the board and only be down a touchdown, getting the ball back after halftime, I would consider that adversity handled.
I agree. It was certainly it was harrowing, and obviously we then go into the Usher halftime show, and you and I are kind of pacing around and kind of not sure what to think. Like it was, I mean, it was a Super Bowl, so you're obviously stressed and you're down, but like at the same time, the Niners had only scored 10 points. It's not like the Niners were running away with this thing. The Chiefs defense had clearly come to play. They had the early CMC forced fumble on a drive that they were driving. I mean, the Chiefs defense was showing up. So I think our mindset here was like, if the defense can continue to do what they've done for the last second half of the year, which was to completely shut down teams in the second half, all the Chiefs need to do is get a couple drives together and this thing would be a game again. So of course that leads to inspiring some hope because we needed it. We needed to be inspired. And let's talk about the guy that we just talked about in the numbers, the figures, Harrison Butker. Jake Moody, his counterpart on the Niners, had just set the longest field goal in Super Bowl history earlier in the game with his 55-yard field goal, which was a bomb. And Jake Moody, we talked about before the game, was one for
Jake
3
Booty.
on kicks of 40. Jake Booty was 1 for 3 on kicks of 40 yards or more. So I mean, he went into this game us thinking that was a clear advantage for the Chiefs, but he immediately sets a Super Bowl record for distance field goal, which is crazy. And then all Butker does is he lines up a 57-yarder. It was a bad snap that Tommy Townsend, RIP, handled and put the ball down. And then Butker hit the lowest, has to be by far the lowest 57-yard kick in NFL history. I mean, it barely left the ground and went through like 2 or 3 Niners hands that could have easily blocked it, but it just sunk through there and then nails it, gets the kick. And then, that lead 10-6 with 5 minutes left in the third, that kind of gets you to where, okay, now a touchdown not only ties this game up, it takes the lead. Like that's a big difference between 7 and 4. That's a big difference for mindset. That's a big difference for if you hold the Niners to a 3 on their next possession, it's still a 1 point or 1 possession game. So a lot of momentum there by coming up with a long field goal on, that 10-6 deficit. He has been one of the best kickers in NFL history, quite frankly. I mean, there are plenty of arguments that can be made that Harrison Butker should be a Mount Rushmore kicker right now if he retired today, based on accuracy, based on big kicks in the playoffs, based on just raw numbers. I mean, there are a lot of kickers that kicked for a long time, but there are not a lot of kickers that have the playoff profile of Harrison Butker. And I just think that not enough people, everybody gives Reed, Mahomes, and Kelsey their flowers for being Mount Rushmore players and coach, in the sport. But Butker's absolutely right there with them. He inspired a lot of hope from me. Love that dude on this kick.
It's rare to see an intersection of a kicker who is truly elite in the regular season and also has the postseason resume that Butker has. Because obviously that really has nothing to do with the kicker, right? Like the kickers are important, but they have very little control. You got to be the best kicker in the league, and that team could go over 17, right? Like, it's just not that important part of a roster for them to have that much control over wins and losses. And yet, when you're in these tight games in the playoffs, they can be absolutely the difference between winning and losing. And when you have an elite kicker, which he absolutely has been in the regular season, who's on a team with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce and Chris Jones and Steve Spagnuolo and all these guys, I mean, that's a recipe for all-time greatness. I mean, even if you look at, Adam Vinatieri, like, we've sort of entered an era, and I don't know, I haven't pulled the numbers on this to sort of figure out where the demarcation lines are for this era of kicking. We're obviously in an era where kickers are better than they've ever been, and they've sort of been improving exponentially over the last 10 or 15 years, right? Like, if you look at all the current leaders and all-time field goal percentage, obviously they're all guys that are currently active. Adam Vinatieri was like a career 80-something% field goal kicker. Butker's right at 90%. He's right there with Justin Tucker for the best field goal percentage of all time. But the difference, and this is no knock on Justin Tucker, because again, a lot of this is out of his control, but the difference between Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker is that Butker has won 3 Super Bowls and has kicked a game-winning field goal in an AFC Championship game and has kicked a game-winning field goal in the Super Bowl and has 6 kicks over 50 yards in the playoffs, which is an all-time NFL record. And Justin Tucker doesn't have any of those things. So, Justin Tucker can be the greatest kicker of all time, and he can set every regular season record, and he may well do that. And he's been a dominant kicker in the regular season, but he just won't ever approach. And listen, I made this point the other day on Twitter, and I got a lot of pushback from Ravens fans, which I knew that I would. They're still hurting, they're still vulnerable, and it's on me for
I get it.
Kind of poking the bear a little bit. I did feel a little bit bad when I started getting the pushback, but my point was not to tear down Justin Tucker. Justin Tucker has a NFL record 66-yard field goal because the Ravens had an end of game scenario where they needed to kick to win the game.
Yeah.
They committed a false start penalty to back them up, I think. Or in fact,
Yeah, you're right. Delay game. It was delay game.
Committed, and they committed the penalty on the kick as well, but it wasn't called. But it pushed them back to a situation where, I mean, you have to kick in that situation. You just have no other option. It's Justin Tucker sets an NFL record or you lose the game. And those are your only two options. The Chiefs have never put Butker in that situation.
No.
I have total confidence that if Harrison Butker, had they put out Harrison Butker to kick from 60 plus to win the Super Bowl. Now 66 is pushing it. That's a very long ways, but he could hit it. I'm certain that if Harrison Butker started getting opportunities from that distance, he would be able to hit from that distance. He hit from 70 yards in warmups. I get it. Ravens fans were in my mentions. They were like, "Oh, warm-ups, that's cute." Okay, but 70 yards.
Yeah, at least
you're trying to tell me that a guy that hits a field goal 70 yards in warm-ups, that guy can't hit a 65 or 66 yarder in a game? Yep. Of course he could. Did you see the 57 yarder he hit? It was off. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I mean, the 66 yarder was in Ford Field. It was in a dome. So
exactly. Give me a break.
I mean, so you set Butker up in a dome in perfect kicking conditions, and I think that record's within reach. And I wouldn't be surprised if he lines up a 67 sometime in either a blowout or an end of half scenario, or just something where he wants to kick from, that would be from the 50.
When he's not going to do it though, in an end of game scenario to win the game. You know why?
You're right. Because
his quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, and Patrick Mahomes is going to get you closer than that. And it doesn't. If you look at, 13 seconds, the end of the AFC Championship game against the Patriots. All of those games. You had the end of the AFC Championship game against the Bengals last year.
Right.
All of those games, Mahomes has gotten them. They'll put up the field goal line on the screen, and every single time the Chiefs have gotten way past that. For a game
way past
kick, right?
Almost instantly.
It's not. It's never even close. As soon as it's on the screen, it's the Chiefs are in field goal range, and they always are so conservative with those when they put the lineup on the board, right?
They'll put
and they don't do it based on who the kicker actually is.
No,
it's just sort of
it's like the 30-yard line. They just put it at the 30.
Exactly. It's 50 yards, so it's right around the 30, 33. Yeah. That's where you got to get to for a field goal. Every broadcast does it the same way. And it's Butker could probably hit from the 50, but we're going to put the line up there, and then Mahomes is always going past it. So all that to say that, he's a pretty inspiring guy, and the kick itself, which we haven't even talked that much about, was a hella inspiring kick. It was an outrageous line drive kick that barely made it past, the passer or the kick rush. The rushers coming in to block the kick, and it shouldn't have made it, and yet it still had distance to spare. Not a whole lot, but oh man, yeah, I'm feeling inspired by it right now, if I'm being honest.
I agree. And so then, of course, the next up in the system is engage physically. Even though the big latest turnover of the game came on a San Francisco fumble on a Chiefs punt late in the third, there really wasn't much to engage physically with, since it bounced off a blocker's heel and the Chiefs just kind of jumped on it. So instead of picking that turnover or that, I'd like to highlight in general the Chiefs' second half defense, because as has been the case for the back half of the season, certainly the last 9 games that they played, they were just dominant in the second half of this one. They only allowed 9 second half points to the Niners in the third and fourth quarter, including 3 straight 3-and-outs to start the second half, which were so massive. The Chiefs started the second half out with a fumble on a pitch to Pacheco and then throwing a pick. And then the Chiefs immediately, with the Niners taking over at midfield, forced a 3-and-out and a punt back to them. And then, because that punt back to them pinned them so deep, the Chiefs couldn't really do anything with that ball. Got to punt it back to the Niners. But again, the Chiefs defense forced a 3-and-out. They were unbelievable. They were so game to play against a a cast of offensive playmakers that is second to none in the NFL and close to, if not the most impressive cast of playmakers, of offensive skill players that the NFL's ever seen. I mean, from all those guys and what they did this year, the Chiefs defense with Jones, Snead, McDuffie, Karlaftis, Chenal, you name them, they all engaged physically when it was absolutely the most crucial, because it's one thing to shut the Dolphins down in a wild card game at home. It's another thing to shut down this juggernaut of a Shanahan offense with these all pros all over the place on offense. And boy, these guys came to play, and they engaged as physically as you can ask for.
I think the thing that really stands out to me about this game and how the defense played is just how well the defense tackled in this game. And we talked about it in the preview, but the Niners offense, and really every Shanahan style offense. So this goes for when we were playing against the Dolphins and those other Shanahan style offenses in the regular season and in the playoffs that we dominated. The Chiefs are just so good at tackling. And it's crazy that, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2018, that was like the worst tackling defense I've ever seen.
Yes,
in all of my years watching football, that team could not tackle to save their lives. And here in the Super Bowl, the biggest stage, going against a team that led the NFL in yards after the catch, probably, although I haven't looked it up, led the NFL in forced missed tackles. The Chiefs had 8 missed tackles in this game. And if I'm being honest with you, that number seems high to me. Mike Edwards and Justin Reed had 2. No other guy on the team had more than 1. And, I'm sure we'll talk about these plays, but the plays at the 2-minute warning, the play right before it, and then the 2-minute warning at the end of regulation. Back-to-back plays by Trent McDuffie. Obviously, the blitz on 3rd and 4 coming out of the 2-minute warning to force the 49ers to kick and essentially prevent a loss. Save the game. Because if the Niners get a first down there, the game's essentially over. The play before that, Trent McDuffie made a tackle in space on, I think it was
Kittle. It's George Kittle.
Yeah, George Kittle.
Took him right to the ground, and that is an impressive ass tackle.
Right, straight to the ground. George Kittle he's like
twice his size.
Yeah, I was going to say he's not twice his size.
No, but it's close.
George Kittle is listed at 250 pounds. The Niners pride themselves. They love to say that George Kittle is like a tackle that can catch. And right. Trent McDuffie's like 5'10" and like maybe 200 pounds.
It's soaking wet. Yeah.
And he just tackled him and took him to the ground. And then the very next play, of course, comes in unblocked, disguises that blitz perfectly, causes, Purdy to panic and throw the ball away and saves the game. But that's just the defense, man. That's just the 2023 Chiefs doing what they do.
Yes, I have a great number that I saw on free rushers. The Chiefs led the NFL this year in number of free rushers, and that's totally a Spag stat. But their most they ever had in a game this season before the Super Bowl was 7 free rushers, and they led the NFL. So that's pretty significant, right? That's a lot of free rushers.
Sure, 7 in a game is
until the Super Bowl when they had 9. They had 9 free rushers. So that's as good as these guys are, and we will give Spags a little bit more flowers here in a bit, but have to shout out Steve Spagnuolo for the brilliant game plan. You want to talk about that second half defense. It starts and ends with Steve Spagnuolo. He was in his bag. He was doing everything that we expect from the greatest defensive coordinator of all time in the history of the NFL. He is the dude. I'm gonna move us on. I'm gonna move us on to finishing strong, because after engaging physically, of course, you have to finish the job. You have to finish strong. And through the first 9 Chiefs drives, they had 6 total points. They were struggling. They had moved the ball a couple times, but either settled for a short field goal or turned the ball over. But on their final 4 drives of the game, they scored 19 points. Would have had a 20th point if they had kicked an extra point at the end of the game, after capping off the muffed punt with a 1-play touchdown drive on a pass to MVS to take their first lead. the Niners went right back out with the longest drive in the game to that point, a 12-play, 75-yard touchdown drive, capped off by Juwan Jennings fighting through some tackles and scoring. But of course, they missed that extra point when Leo Chenal blocked it, and it was a 3-point game. The teams traded field goals to end regulation tied, and after the slow start to the game on offense, they were moving the ball. I mean, for finishing the Super Bowl with 4 straight drives of 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals is exactly what they did when they were down in the fourth quarter in Super Bowl 54, and they had 3 straight touchdown drives to end that game. And I mean, the way that this team rises to the occasion and finishes strong in a game that, to dig deep in the Super Bowl, all these players have pushed their energy to the limit early, like second, third quarter. These guys have to be absolutely gassed both mentally and physically. It's the most demanding game they've ever played in. But because the Chiefs we're playing in their 4th one of these in 5 years, you just got to wonder if they had a little bit more experience in saving some for when the game was actually on the line. Obviously, nobody will ever know if that's true, but it does feel when you watch these two teams go at each other that the Niners, we mentioned this earlier, came out of this game like they wanted to kill the Chiefs. Like they absolutely were pissed. They were still thinking about Super Bowl 54 and just came out with, a fire, but that they didn't quite manage their game and their energy levels. And by the fourth quarter, the Chiefs just looked like the team that was, all right, now that the game's on the line, like we're going to go execute on both sides of the ball. As good of a finish strong. I know there wasn't a ton of touchdowns and all that stuff, but as far as executing on both ends of the ball at the end of a game, this is as good of a finish strong as I can remember in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine a better finish to this game. And you have to, we obviously just gave the defense its flowers, and we'll continue to do so when we get to our awards segment. But you had to think that, the Chiefs were going to figure things out on offense eventually. And this year, it's taken a little bit longer than it has in the past because the supporting cast on offense, particularly the pass catchers, just it's not a very strong unit. And we knew that it wouldn't be coming into the year. It fell below even our lowest expectations, and they pretty much played down to their expected talent level the entire year, including in this game, until the very end. But you kind of could get the sense that, I mean, when you watch these, and, obviously NFL films, the Super Bowl, we get such great coverage of everything that happens on the sidelines. And that's always such a joy to watch. But you get the sense that, the Niners knew it. I can't remember which player it was, but he was like, they're going to get theirs eventually. And, you also had guys calling Pat, an ordinary quarterback, and we're going to make him look ordinary. But at least one of those guys at least had the wisdom to think hey, you knew they were going to figure some of this stuff out eventually, and it's okay. We just got to get another stop, whatever. Well, they didn't get another stop because Andy and Pat and Travis and the other guys figured out the defense, and it took them, 3 quarters. But when you have an elite defense, you have time to figure that stuff out. And, the longer the game went on, you had to think that, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid versus Steve Wilks, that was going to be an advantage for the Chiefs, and it was.
2 of those men still have a job in the NFL, and one of them doesn't, and I'll let you figure out which one it is.
Oof, okay.
Of course, it would be fine if it was the Chief system, the Chief singular, but of course you have to get to the S. The whole point of the system is to separate entirely. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it? And
that's Super Bowl S, buddy.
Yeah, that's right. It's a big one. It's a big Super Bowl S. After San Francisco elected to take the ball to start overtime, we've already gone over this and the thought process, both, behind both teams and what we thought about it and all that. But they could only muster a short field goal on 4th and 4 from the 9, which I think is the worst part of the execution on Shanahan's part, is not necessarily taking the ball, but you almost have to pretend when you take that ball first, like you're down 7. To me,
sure.
I think you have to punch that ball in, even if 4th and 4, it's not 4th and 14. It's a short play, relatively. And I just think that he lost his advantage there by kicking that really short field goal. But the Chiefs did what the Chiefs always do. They separated entirely at this point with a legacy enhancing, not defining because it's happened before and it will happen again, but a legacy enhancing 13 play, 75-yard, 7-minute drive in overtime that saw the only play in Super Bowl history where if the offense doesn't convert the play, the game is over and the offense loses. The only play in NFL Super Bowl history. Every other time a trailing team late in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl has had the ball, they have had 3 timeouts. It's only happened 2 other times. And both of those times, the trailing team, if they didn't convert a fourth down, would have been able to call 3 timeouts and get the ball back. So this is the only time where it would have actually ended the game on that play, which is just an unbelievable leverage. I mean, that's like dynasty leverage right there, like to be able to have that play. Of course, we all remember it. It's the 4th and 1 scramble by Mahomes there. There was also later in that drive a 3rd and 6 to Rashee Rice, which was massive. I mean, at that point, you're in field goal range. You wonder if that ball doesn't make it there, what Andy does on 4th and 6 at that point, but you don't have to wonder because they caught it. They Niners called the zero blitz there, and the Chiefs read it like a book. They absolutely had Rice on the crosser. Mahomes said 4, get ready for it before this play starts. And I mean, they all knew what they were going to do there. And then the 3rd and 1 scramble for 19 yards up the middle of the game, that signaled that the game was over. It was just a matter of how, but it was not a matter of who was going to win. The moment Mahomes took off and ended up at the 13-yard line, that was like, all right, so let's see how the Chiefs are going to go win a Super Bowl. And they tried to get Pacheco first for a couple yards. Then they gave it to Kelsey on a little, like a chip screen that he ended up taking really close. He fought through a couple tackles, got him down to the 3. Certainly, I thought for a second Kelsey was going to just power
that one and the end of regulation too. Both of those plays, it was like
yes,
he wanted it both times.
Yeah, he had that crosser with 16 seconds left in the end of regulation that he took down to close to the 10. And yes, I certainly thought that was going to be a Chargers moment and he was going to walk into the end zone. But of course, then a little corn dog magic, a little McCole Hardman out and in, finished the Niners off for good. The best S of them all is the one that stands for Super Bowl champions. And that is what they did here to separate entirely.
Yeah. I mean, what can you say about it other than it felt inevitable and yet it was still incredibly stressful, intense. Totally. We talked through the emotions of this a little bit already with Randy, both in the emergency podcast and then in the podcast that we did last week. But it always just cracks me up. What I love about the Super Bowl, again, is just the content that we get. And because it's the Super Bowl, there's just so much more that comes out of these games that you would never get from a regular season game or even, a lesser playoff game. So like this 4th and 1 call, for example, literally the biggest play. I mean, one of the biggest plays in Super Bowl history, because as you mentioned, literally the only time in Super Bowl history, the offense must convert or the game is over and they lose. Literally like the most do or die play in the history of the Super Bowl, 4th and 1, a yard to extend your chance at a championship. Marquez Valdes-Scantling called that play. So, they were just kind of out there on the field and MVS was like, he suggested the play and Mahomes was like, yeah, that will definitely work. Let's run that. And
who needs that? And Andy Reid.
Yeah. I mean, like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mahomes even said, I think he did this in a Peter King interview. He kind of was like, I mean, that's like not even a play for MVS. No, it's like a play for Travis and then Rashee Rice, and obviously
and Mahomes
there was an option for Mahomes to run the ball.
Yes.
And it's
what that reminds me of? Spags was telling the story of Bolton and how the play before the 2-minute warning, they had something called that the Niners hit the 2-minute warning, and then Spags goes back to the playbook and he signals into Bolton, what do you think about this play that involved McDuffie, blitzing? And Bolton loved it. That's the same mentality of these players are not saying give me the ball, I want the glory, I want everything. They're saying, what are we going to do to win this game as a team? Right. I mean, that's MVS calling a play where he's not involved is actually probably, if I think about it, him covering his ass. Like he probably thought, Andy, I'm not even going to let you call in anything that involves me at all. Pat, why don't you run the Rasheed Kelsey U play and I'll watch and it'll be fun. I mean, that's,
Right.
and
Right.
smart on him, because if he had dropped that ball, I'm not sure he would have made it through the morning, but he didn't, because he didn't get the opportunity.
That's
Because the Chiefs
a
called the right play.
rather cynical way to look at it, but yes, that is an entirely plausible explanation for
The most
why that
I don't
happened.
want the ball moment in sports history.
You know what though? It worked out. Like, and that's what's crazy to me is that even in a year where you have all these guys who have underperformed. I mean, like, in what world is your wide receiver three out there like calling the biggest play of the year?
Right.
And
Right.
it just is. It's an unfathomably strange situation, and yet obviously it worked out, and the Chiefs are Super Bowl champions, and that's just how. I mean, that's really like it encapsulates in a lot of ways like what this season was. It was weird, and like the Chiefs figured it out, and it's really hard to sort of look back this season. We're going to look back this season I mean, we're already doing it 2 weeks out. We're definitely going to look back this season in 5 or 10 years and be like, how the fuck did we win the Super Bowl? Like,
That was crazy.
Remember
that year?
None of this makes any sense at all.
You remember Super Bowl number 3 out of the 7 we've just won,
right?
And how insane that was,
and what a weird Super Bowl it was. But that's how you separate entirely, and that's how you get to be Super Bowl champions. It's a good place to be. Let's turn now to our awards. For those of you who have not experienced this podcast before or who are unfamiliar with the format, we have 3 different types of awards on the show. Normally, we award one player each for each type of award. We'll do this a little bit differently because it's the Super Bowl and we don't have anything else to do on this podcast. This is how we'll close things out tonight. So we've got 5-star men. Those are people who, through their play on the field, shout out, I'm a 5-star man. We have, of course, our trash men.
I'm the trash man. I come out, I throw trash all over the ring, and then I start eating garbage.
Who, through their play on the field, are essentially eating garbage. Their play is trash. And then we have our wild cards.
Wild card, bitches! Yeah!
Who are capable of anything. So I will let you kick us off with the 5-star men, and we're each going to pick 3 in this game. And I will say, before you complain about our choices, yes, we could have picked many more than 6 5-star men total, 3 each. But we'd literally record a podcast where we'd have like 45-star men and then like 13 wild cards or 15 wild cards and, a couple of trash men. And yeah, it would be like a 6-hour episode.
It would. They call that champagne problems, when you can't figure out which of your players you want to award the award for being awesome in the game.
Sometimes you just don't know the answer.
There you go. Knew you'd come back with one there. I have to start off. We're no drama in this one. I'm going to pick the guy that won his 3rd career Super Bowl MVP.
3 for 3.
Of course. 3 for 3. What can you say about Patrick Mahomes? We actually haven't really spoken very much about Patrick Mahomes in this podcast, in this episode. It was a team effort, and we will talk about that team effort in all of our other awards here. But, we clearly have to talk about the guy that makes it all happen. The guy that, before him, Andy Reid was the guy that couldn't win the big game, and is now, Mahomes is now well on his way to, if he's not already there, to being the greatest football player anyone's ever seen. And that comes with a weight that is sometimes hard to describe. It's sometimes something we try and cover it a lot on this show, and we try and talk about the big picture, the zoom out, the history of the NFL stuff. But like what we saw last Sunday was history. It was a legend being born right in front of our eyes, or continuing to ascend. He's already been born, of course, before this, but he was brilliant. He was brilliant in this game. He did not panic. He did not have you know, I mean, he's had some struggles in Super Bowls, statistically, certainly not performance wise. I mean, the Bucks Super Bowl for sure is one of his better individual, just like superhero efforts that he's had in any game. But of course, the circumstances were tough. But in this one, he throws for over 300 yards in the Super Bowl for the first time. He led the team in rushing with 66 yards on the ground, which was a huge part of back breaking. You can cover everybody and you can get everything blocked up the way you want to on defense or whatever. But if Mahomes scampers for 19 yards on a crucial third down, there's not much you can do other than shake your head and say, well, guess I wish we had that guy. We're so lucky. We're so lucky that he's our quarterback, that you and I have been able to watch him for these last 6 years. And just, he hasn't ever let us down, ever. Like the way that he has crafted this team to be one of the greatest teams in Super Bowl or in NFL history. I mean, there's a lot of people that are involved with making that happen, but he is number one, even above Andy Reid. I mean, he is the lion's share of the pie there. And we're so lucky. We're so thankful. So he is once again, many times, clearly the leader in the clubhouse of 5-star awards on our podcast history, and will continue to win many more. Patrick Lavon Mahomes II.
5-star men of 5-star men. I was having a conversation with a more casual football fan in my family the other day, and she actually was concerned with Travis's behavior in the Super Bowl, which is fine. She's a Swiftie. And, she was like, I just wish he could be more like Patrick. And I was like, I get it. Like, first of all, I will defend Travis to the hilt, as has everyone, including Andy Reid. But I mean, my response to that was, they really they broke the mold when they made Patrick Mahomes. It's not just that he's the greatest football player of all time. He's also just a really swell guy. And I mean, it's really hard to imagine a person like that existing in the world. But not only that existing, but playing quarterback for our favorite football team. And I mean, what can you say about the guy? For my first 5-star man, I will go with a coach, and I will go with, I mean, we could debate their place in history. You said Patrick Mahomes is number one. Andy Reid is probably number two. And then you could maybe throw Travis in there for obviously his incredible contributions on the field. But at worst, fourth in
Agreed.
the history of this dynasty is Steve Spagnuolo. And we've talked a lot about what his defense did in this game. I've really appreciated that this time around he's gotten. Now, obviously, the Chiefs gave up 35 points against the Eagles. So I understand why he wasn't necessarily getting the publicity tour that he's getting this time around after holding one of the greatest offenses in NFL history to 19 points of regulation and 22 points total. I understand that, but I've really appreciated him getting the publicity, whether it's going on Peter King or going on with Brian Baldinger, or he's been making the rounds. And it's been so cool to hear him. Last year, I literally heard one interview with him, and it was on, of all places, a Denver radio station, and it was posted on Mile High Report. And I found it when I went over there to troll Mile High Report, and I was like, "Oh, an interview with Steve Spagnuolo. I don't think I've heard this. Haven't seen this anywhere." So it's been great to hear him talk about his game plan in this game. You mentioned some of the pivotal calls, obviously the 3rd and 4 at the 2-minute warning in regulation. He changed that play call over the 2-minute warning and got the feedback from Nick Bolton, and decided to run it. It was a 4th down stopper, and he was just saying, and he's said this in a couple of interviews, like he kind of, the 2-minute warning comes, it's a long timeout, a long break in the Super Bowl because of all the commercials and the extra TV time that they have to devote to Super Bowl timeouts. And, he kind of got in there and was thinking, like, I mean, this really is a 4th down play. This is the game right here. So it really was a 4th down play call. I mean, it was something that they had in the playbook for a 4th down, a do or die situation. And he thought, I mean, it's 3rd and 4, but like, this is the game right here. I better call my best play. he went to, the guy that he trusts on the defense, Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton said, yeah, let's run it. And they ran it. And it's crazy that, like, obviously he's won, 2 other Super Bowls with the Chiefs, and the Chiefs have had good defensive performances in a way in both of those games, all things considered. But this was a dominant defensive performance. I mean, this was I don't think we talked about this in the preview. We talked about it in the recap, but like this literally by DVOA success rate, pretty much any metric you can conceive, this was like one of the greatest offenses in the history of the NFL. And
Baltimore
right up
wasn't far behind him.
right up there, exactly, right up there with the 2007 Patriots, literally the greatest offense in NFL history, whom Steve Spagnuolo in his first year as an NFL defense coordinator held to 14 points in the Super Bowl. So this guy's the GOAT. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's going to be the first assistant coach, the first coordinator of the Hall of Fame. I'm calling my shot right now. 5-star man through and through.
I think he's going to get a head coaching job, and he's going to go into the Hall of Fame as a coach and not necessarily as a coordinator. He deserves it. He does whatever shot he would like to take as far as running his own team or doing his own. I mean, I'm sure he would like to continue to be on the Chiefs maybe and be Andy's successor. I mean, that I think would probably appeal to him. But at the end of the day, I think Spags deserves everything that anybody wants to throw it his way. He's unbelievable. Good pick there for your 5 stars. Of course, we're starting off with some bangers. I'm going to stick with Spags group, and I'm going to go with Chris Jones. For the second consecutive Super Bowl against the Niners, there's a pretty decent argument to be made that Chris Jones was the best player on the field on both teams.
Sure.
I mean, he was just so disruptive, and the way that he dominated that interior of the Niners line really turned the game around as far as their inability to rush up the middle. They tried over and over and over again with Christian McCaffrey to run up the middle, and he was either there or he would either be there and make the stop himself or be there to force the play into somewhere else that it would get picked up on. And he continues to execute in big moments better than any other defensive lineman I've ever watched play football. I mean, if you absolutely need a play, there aren't too many guys I would rather call on in the history of football than Chris Jones to go make it. And, there have been some drama with him and with his contract situation and with all the just kind of, he's held out multiple times from getting a new deal, but he always eventually did get a new deal of some kind. And there's going to be more drama, I'm sure, this offseason. I don't see this going easily, getting Chris Jones back into the fold, but I do see it happening. I do see the Chiefs valuing his contributions so highly. And I think with their capital, and I think with all the goodwill that was bought by him coming back to the team and then playing really, really well and then winning a second consecutive Super Bowl, and then him, the parade speech where he said, I ain't going nowhere. That comes from your heart when you're drunk. That's
right.
That's not a like posturing or him trying to that's just him expressing how much he loves being on this team. And I think that matters. I think that matters in negotiations of a lot of money and all that stuff where, he's such a big part of this team. He's a 5-star man in this game and one of the greatest Chiefs of all time.
Yeah, I have nothing to add to that. That's Chris Jones, and I hope he's a Chief next season, and I hope he's a Chief for life. For my second pick, I'll stay on the defense. I'll go with Trent McDuffie. I think, it's crazy that a player with still 0 career interceptions was first team All-Pro this year, and we're talking about him as one of our 5-star men in the Super Bowl. But here we are. I mean, this was we've already talked about it. To me, the back-to-back plays right before and right after the 2-minute warning in regulation where he sticks George Kittle and then turns around and, rushes the passer as a free rusher. I don't, we've talked about this play a lot, but the 3rd and 4 play, I mean, the wherewithal to disguise that rush is
so good.
Is so important.
Forward, back, forward.
I mean, it just is like there's so much nuance to that, and I a lot of that's got to be coaching because the Chiefs under Steve Spagnuolo, who I just nominated as my first 5-star man, have had unbelievable blitzing defensive backs. Like it just is crazy. Tyrann Mathieu, Justin Reed's had his moments. Of
Snead.
course, L'Jarius Sneed, before he became a shutdown man, shadow cover corner, was like doing the stuff that Trent McDuffie is doing now. But it's wild to me that the Chiefs take a 5'10" cornerback with T-Rex arms who weighs 200 pounds and turn him into like the best blitzing DB in the NFL in his second NFL season. That's crazy to me. And obviously a lot of that goes on coaching, but a lot of it goes on the player. And we haven't even mentioned the pass breakup that he had in the end zone where he literally went up and deflected the ball that was
Debo.
headed for Debo. That would have been a touchdown. I mean, and textbook. I mean, like, you know what? There have been so many salty Niners fans in my mentions and everyone's mentions complaining about holds or penalties that could have been happened. I haven't seen that play happen one single time. And like for a play in the end zone in the Super Bowl that the Niners lost, that would have been a touchdown in a game that was tied at the end of regulation and ultimately they lost by 3 points. For them to not even bring that play up is wild. Like that just shows you how good of a play it was. It was so clean that you don't even have the saltiest fan base in the NFL currently, who now has lost 2 Super Bowls to the Chiefs in the last 5 years, even bringing it up. That you literally cannot play more perfect coverage than that. And then to have that play, the tackle of Kittle on 2nd and 5, right before the 2-minute warning, and then the free rush, right after the 2-minute warning to save the game. I'm not being dramatic about it. Like that's the game right there. To have all those on your highlight reel for a single game in a Super Bowl is insane. And like, that's not all he did in this game, but it's wild. It's a 5-star performance from an unbelievable player. And I will just mention one final time that, James Palmer's sources in the Buffalo Bills organization this year told him that they think that Trent McDuffie is the best blitzer, the best blitzing defensive back in the NFL. Yes. Brett Veach, man. Brett Veach.
He continues to just build unbelievable rosters. I'll go with the guy that he plucked off a practice squad and turned into one of the greatest players at his position of all time. Of course, I've already talked a lot about Harrison Butker. So, I mean, I'll just leave it with his performance here was absolutely necessary. Hitting every kick in this game, this very tight back and forth, every point mattered, extra point blocked by the other team. I mean, just every opportunity to miss a kick and it not be your fault or it be understandable. Like they're a 57-yarder. If he had shanked that thing, I don't think anybody would be sitting here going, well, the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl because Harrison Butker didn't hit a 57-yard field goal, I mean, but he did hit it. And it's just, he's the best and a huge reason why the Chiefs are able to win all these close games. 5-star man.
For my last 5-star man, and obviously there are a lot of people that I could go with here. A lot of honorable mentions. I'm going to stick on the defense and I will select Leo Chenal. Leo had the blocked extra point, obviously, on special teams, and just was coming up with huge stops in this game. He forced the fumble, obviously, on the first drive of the game on Christian McCaffrey, really set the tone. And I think when you hear people break down the X's and O's from this game, which obviously it's not our forte. I will not sit here and tell you, I'm not going to break down the film for you. But Brian Baldinger did a great film review and also interviewed Steve Spagnuolo and talked about the way that they were using Leo Chenal in this game and just what a unique player he is, because when he was drafted, we were excited about the fact that he's a 99.9 percentile athlete at linebacker. He's literally like the second
gets us going, man.
He's the second most athletic linebacker by relative athletic score ever. And he's huge. I mean, the guy's 250 pounds and he's fast and he's strong as hell and he's tough as hell and he's death row. I mean, like the versatility of a player like that, that's a guy that, I mean, Steve Spags said in the interview that, his type of player really is kind of going extinct in the NFL. And yet here the Chiefs are, selecting this player in the third round last season and finding a spot for him and a role for him that allows him to be just such a chess piece on defense. And it's crazy how many of those guys the Chiefs have, right?
That's like who they draft.
I mean,
They
like,
draft chess pieces.
yeah, sure. Whether it's Justin Reed or whether it's Leo or whether it's Chris
McDuffie,
Jones,
Snead.
playing inside out, Omenahu when he was healthy, McDuffie, Snead, literally everybody on the defense. And when you pair that with a guy like Steve Spagnuolo throwing all these different looks at other teams, that is a recipe for success. Leo is awesome. And I would be remiss if I did not mention his excellent reintroduction to Twitter/X this week, where he made a new account and was called out because, of course, you can't trust anything you see on the internet, especially on that website these days. And somebody challenged him to post a picture of him drinking milk without a cap, and he popped the milk off with, a single thumb and said it's Leo no cap and posted that video. And it was
It's so good.
incredible. It was a great video. If you've not seen that, go check it out. But let's turn to our trash man, and I will give you the first selection in the trash man field as well.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. First of all, because we won the Super Bowl, and second of all, because I really like this player. But I mean, I think it's undeniable that this was the worst game of Isaiah Pacheco's career. He put the ball on the ground at the 9-yard line when the Chiefs were floundering and absolutely needed to score the ball. He put that ball on the ground to start the third quarter. That was like, all right, they're going to come out. They're down 7.
Which was
they're gonna
technically credited
together.
to Mahomes, but like, come on.
Yes, I mean it was a little high. The pitch was a little high.
It was, and a little
at the end
little
of the day,
behind him,
though,
but
you're an NFL player. You got to watch that ball. You got to come up with it.
and that's going to be the call coming out of halftime, right? Like they have to know.
Yeah,
that.
of course he does. Yeah, exactly. So and he didn't exactly run wild. He had a fine game on the ground, I suppose, but at the end of the day, I mean, the Niners looked like they were keying on him, which it makes sense, that he's been a big factor in this team's success, but 18 rushes for 59 yards, a long of 10. He averaged 3.3. He didn't get it going. And I'll just leave it there. I love Pacheco. I love him on this team. I think he was a absolute home run draft pick in the 7th round. He's the only player that's ever had his first 2 seasons as the starting running back of a Super Bowl champion in NFL history. But in this game, he was a trash man.
Yeah, I'll keep this simple and I'll stay in the running back room, and I will select the perennial trash man, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, listen, our trash man options for this game were thankfully quite limited, and Richie James, I guess, gets an honorable mention for me. 1 target, 0 receptions, and nearly cost the Chiefs. Yeah, nearly cost the Chiefs big. On special teams, not only the muffed punt that he fortunately was able to recover, but he also did not fair catch one and got completely blown up by Chris Conley.
Oh.
It's an absolute miracle that he didn't fumble the ball there, which I guess is to his credit. But my God, don't put yourself in that situation, man. Clyde had 1 carry in this game for 0 yards, and it was a 2nd and long, I believe, and they just didn't. I mean, he had no chance. The Chiefs should know better than to even give him the ball in that situation. It was 2nd and 4. It wasn't actually 2nd and long. So, I mean, that's a play that the Chiefs could have converted. And
which drive was that?
It was on the last drive before halftime, and the Chiefs did end up kicking the field goal. They did end up converting. Right. Yeah,
right.
Because the play after that, McCole had a false start penalty, and then Justin Watson picks up 21 yards on the 3rd and 9.
That was a great play.
But it required a clutch play by Patrick Mahomes to bail the team out. It was fortunate that for once Clyde did not successfully kill the drive, despite his best efforts. I mean, listen, it just is. There's no burst on the guy. There hasn't been all year. I don't wish him ill, but he was a trash man in this game, and really has been a trash man for the majority of his Chiefs career, which we must assume is coming to an end here shortly.
We must. Yep. Fair wishes to Clyde. I hope His NFL playing days are not over, but I do hope they're over with the Chiefs. I will now make it a little bit more fun because we really didn't. You're right. The pickings on Trashman were few and far between in this game. So you and I decided before that we would each pick a non-chief for another Trashman, and so
I love picking non-Chiefs for the trash man.
me too. And in fact, we probably should just from now on just always pick non-Chiefs. But no, there are certain times where Chiefs deserve the trash man as much as anybody. This time, we have to talk about Kyle Shanahan, and in both the big picture and the small picture. Small picture first. I thought that his game plan was poor. I thought that he didn't involve Christian McCaffrey enough. He was very good in this game, but when McCaffrey had his number called, oftentimes it was a run up the gut for very little. They didn't really do a lot of interesting
Under
stuff.
4 yards carry.
When they did, it worked, like the double pass. And I mean, he had a dump off in overtime from Purdy that he, almost took to the house. I mean, there really was like a Super Bowl saving tackle on that play, but he ended up going 20 something yards on it and was a dynamic player. And then of course, Kittle, Ayuk, Samuel, those guys, like you gotta figure something better out if it's me to involve those guys in the game than what Shanahan did. And then that's like small picture stuff. And then of course, big picture, there's the overtime decision, which while I understand the theory behind it, I think the in-game decision of it was poor. I think that the environment in which he made that decision was not the right one. And you've got Mahomes on the other side. You've got to figure out, you can't give him the fourth down. It's not necessarily that you want it yourself. It's that you know that if you go first, that he knows everything he needs to do to go win that game. And that's just if it's another quarterback back there, I kind of like going first in certain scenarios. If you feel pretty good about your defensive matching up against another guy, then yes, let's go out there and try and score a touchdown, hold him, and we win the game. But at the end of the day, he screwed that up. He also is now unequivocally a big game choker in every sense of the word. Maybe the biggest big game choker in NFL history. Certainly has the 28-3 and then 2 10-point leads to the Chiefs that he blew in Super Bowls and an NFC Championship 10-point lead he blew to the Rams. So, I mean,
two of those were in the fourth quarter. I mean, the first Chiefs Super Bowl and obviously 28-3
leads. Yes, exactly. So, he blew it. His dad gave him everything as far as being involved in the NFL, having an offense, he talk about being born on third base. Like this guy has had every opportunity to succeed. And while I do agree that he's clearly a good and smart football mind, and
he's a great coach, but he's a great offensive play caller, but
you need a little bit more than being a great offensive play caller to be a champion. You just need that it factor that he just doesn't seem to possess. He seems to shrink in big moments. And for that reason, when we win the Super Bowl this year, which we did, he gets a Trash Man Award on our podcast.
I can't wait to face him again in the Super Bowl. I listened to a bunch of Niners podcasts on my way back from Kansas City to Colorado because I had exhausted Chiefs podcast content. I had listened to all of the Chiefs related podcasts, and the thing that they kept killing him for was, and Chiefs fans might have missed this, so I figured that I would share it here. In his day after presser, they basically asked him if he had any regrets about the game, essentially, and he was like, I mean, not really. We did everything we planned to do in the game, and we executed. We our plans were good, we just didn't execute them. And it's like, well, yeah, you may come up with the best game plan in the world, and I can't take credit for this take because, again, these were furious Niners podcasters that were hammering this for literally hours on end. I probably listened to 6 hours of Niners podcast content. But your plan has to survive. It can't survive first contact with the enemy. Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And you got to be able to adjust, buddy. And that's 2 Super Bowls against the Chiefs that he failed to do that. But speaking of Shanahan's and speaking of people being born on third base, people who, gosh, just,
Have horse faces.
have horse faces, were once the most revered prospect in the history of the NFL and just kind of coasted on that reputation for decades now, really.
Their whole life.
We got to talk about John Elway. We're probably going to talk about John Elway. I, I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about John Elway.
I can promise you it won't be.
And it certainly will be the third podcast in a row that we've mentioned John Elway since the Super Bowl was over. But John Elway's a trash man. And it's not just that he's a trash man for all the reasons that we've articulated on this podcast for years, from our very first episode to now. But
200 episodes.
John Elway, it took him 16 NFL seasons to win 2 Super Bowls. He made it to 5. He won 1 MVP. He won 1 Super Bowl MVP.
Stolen
Patrick,
MVP.
exactly. Patrick Mahomes in this game passed John Elway in career playoff wins, passing yards, and Super Bowl victories. And then John Elway had to hand him the Lombardi Trophy. And he was on.
It's so absurd.
We did not know the reasoning behind this. The reason is because it was the 25th anniversary of his Super Bowl MVP. And he obviously was asked to do this before
Who it was
before he knew who it was that who was gonna win the game. But since we've clowned on him the first couple of times, I've had the opportunity to listen to him on Adam Schefter's podcast, which just makes the situation seem so much worse. Like, obviously, John, like, this all could have been avoided, in my opinion, if John Elway possessed a little bit less hubris, right? Like, surely at some point, between the AFC Championship game and the Super Bowl, that's 2 weeks, he could have gone to the NFL and been like,
listen,
find somebody else. Listen, it's Super Bowl week. There's going to be thousands of NFL legends in and around the Super Bowl. Pick literally
knows
anybody.
It's his 25th anniversary.
Exactly. Exactly. Who cares? I mean, like, pick literally anybody else. Because assuming that it's a 50-50 scenario, there's a 50% chance that I go into the stadium at the end of the game and I'm handing the Chiefs their 4th Lombardi trophy.
My hated enemies.
I'm handing Patrick Mahomes his 3rd Lombardi trophy, which is going to pass my number of Super Bowl championships. Hell, add in the one that he got as general manager of the Broncos. All right, great. You're handing Mahomes the same number of trophies in 6 years as it took you 16 years as a quarterback and like 6 years plus as a GM to win. That's embarrassing for you, dude. Like, have a little bit of self-respect.
Past people handing the Lombardi down is like not a tradition. So if it had been,
it didn't happen
every
last
year, 25 years ago, the person who won the Super Bowl MVP was walking that Lombardi down, and he just knew, like, God damn it, of course my 25th anniversary is coming up when the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl. Then I could see him just biting the bullet and doing it. But like, he could have just been like, Raj, this is like a dumb new tradition. Like, no, I'm not doing it. Like, you gotta, you can do the 50. They had the I forget who it was, but the Vikings, or not Vikings, but the fullback who got it 50 years
Larry
ago.
Zonka.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Oh, Larry Zonka, of course it was. And he's the one who handed it to Elway. Like, just have Larry Zonka walk it up. Like, just, there's no tradition here.
Yeah. No, the whole situation was just ludicrously embarrassing for John Elway, for the Broncos franchise. And then to top it all off, we really need to take a deeper dive into this later in the offseason, deeper offseason content. But like, I mean, Adam Schefter gave him the opportunity to go off on the Chiefs on his podcast. He, of course, was basically like, he was pretty much begging Elway to be like, fuck the Chiefs. This sucked. I hated this. I hated every second of this. But he didn't say that. He was like, man, it was so great to be, back on the sidelines of the Super Bowl. And it's been a while since I've been down there. And I just have so much respect for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs organization. And of course, I would have preferred to hand it off to Kyle Shanahan. And I got a lot of respect for him and, keep it in the family. And John Lynch, who I used to play with and blah, blah, blah. But, the Chiefs played a great game and I have a lot of respect for that organization. Bro, have some self-respect. You are the
Yes.
face of the Denver Broncos. You're literally
Yes.
this is your most hated
Nightmare.
rival, with the exception of possibly the Oakland Raiders,
Whose stadium you were in?
whose stadium you were in, handing over the Lombardi Trophy. I mean, this is just an embarrassing situation for you. That is there is
He got
literally-
cuts, man. He got cuts hard.
There was literally only one path for John Elway to be a trash man in Super Bowl 58, a game
Yes,
a
and he
game that
took
he
it.
had no connection to whatsoever. Literally none. This was it. This was the only way that John Elway could make it onto the show as a trash man. He had to volunteer to walk the trophy up to the podium to hand over to the Chiefs. What about
Unbelievable. Just an
Let-
unbelievable cherry on top for us.
let me transition us into the wild cards here. And again, we have a lot of options here. But I'm going to go with Big Beast Mike Pennell as my wild card to kick it off. We'll each do 2 wild cards here. Mike Pennell, I mean, this is frankly, I mean, is it any more absurd than like MVS calling, a do or die 4th down play? I don't know. I don't know if it exceeds that. There's a lot of crazy things that happened in this game. Mike Pennell played 3 games in the regular season for the Chiefs. He signed to the practice squad in like October. And obviously he played a significant role. He started started 1 game for the 2020 Chiefs. 8 games, 0 as a starter for the 2019 Chiefs. And obviously was a 2-time starter in the 2019 Super Bowl run. He had a ring from his last tenure with the Chiefs. But listen, like, this guy might not even have been active for this game if Charles Omenihu doesn't tear his ACL in the AFC Championship game. And he was on the couch midway through the season. I mean, he was not on another team. The Chiefs called him up in October and stashed him on the practice squad and dusted him off for 3 regular season games. And then here he is playing in the Super Bowl, starting in the Super Bowl for the 2023 Kansas City Chiefs. And then there's just clips of him just absolutely fucking dominating the best left tackle in the sport, Trent Williams. He's just crushing him. I mean, he was just moving bodies in this game. And I mean, the only reason he's not a 5-star man and he's instead a wild card is because of the absurdity of someone, a 32-year-old defensive tackle who was literally unemployed in October, starting in the Super Bowl and dominating like the best left tackle in the game. And frankly, like one of the best left tackles of the last decade. I mean, if there's an all-decade team for the 2015 to 2025, Trent Williams is probably the starting left tackle for that team. He's probably a Hall of Famer. Mike Pennell made him look like a little kid in this game. He embarrassed him.
He was capable of anything, which is exactly what you want from a wild card nomination. He was awesome. Yeah, that's a really good pick. I'm going to go with a guy that, similar to Mike, wasn't really sure on his availability Jerick McKinnon was on the IR for the latter half of the year, and we weren't sure if he would make it back to the Super Bowl, and then they activated him, and I wasn't sure if he would even get on the field, and he really didn't much, but crucial 3rd down with the game in the balance in the 4th quarter and the waning seconds before the Chiefs ended up kicking the game time field goal. Mahomes found McKinnon. He found him on a pass where he stayed in the block and then leaked out. I mean, classic McKinnon conversion. That's exactly like most of them have ever looked. And that's why he's such a weapon, because he is such a good pass blocking running back and then can pop out there and catch a ball reliably. So that was really nice to see. I know obviously McKinnon didn't get his Super Bowl moment. I really wanted a touchdown because he gave up a touchdown last year in order to win the game, which was very selfless of him and something that I wish the Chiefs could have rewarded, but that's not really how the game breaks out. But to get him a conversion there, even though he had been, he'd been injured for weeks and weeks there, that was fun. So he had a wild card performance for sure.
Yeah, I love that pick because, again, I mean, there are always going to be guys like this on a Super Bowl winning roster, the unheralded players that step up when you least expect it and contribute to a win. But, this goes for Pennell as well, but for those guys to step up and get in McKinnon's case, a second ring because he was not with the team in 2019. So, I mean, for
Correct.
him, Pinnell and McKinnon to get their second Super Bowl ring, to be a part of a back-to-back, obviously McKinnon winning back-to-back rings. I mean, it could be it for both of these guys. Like
Yeah,
it,
certainly.
it could be that these guys are retired in a couple of weeks, and it could be whether they want to be or not. It may be their plan. It may be that the league is passing by, but if this was it for Pinnell and McKinnon, they get to go out on top as Super Bowl champions, which is awesome to see. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I've got a guy who has hopefully a long NFL future ahead of him. That's Felix Anudike-Uzomah, FAU. I mean, we saw nothing from him the entire year, and it's crazy that the Chiefs spent their first round pick on a developmental pass rusher who essentially really didn't play in the regular season this year, hardly at all, and suddenly is being called upon again because of the injury to Omenihu to play snaps in the Super Bowl. He ended up getting 7 defensive snaps in this game, and ended up making a huge stop. His season high snap count was 25, aside from the Week 17 game against the Chargers where the Chiefs were resting their starters. But between Week 7 and Week 16, he played his snap high was 10 snaps. He had a game where he had 9 snaps. He had a game where he had 7, couple with 2, couple with 3. So he really was not getting on the field at all. And for him to come in and make a huge tackle in the first half of this game, in the run, which, wasn't necessarily what we expected him to be coming out of K-State, like we expected him to be a bendy, bursty edge rusher. And then, here he is suddenly crashing down against the run and making a huge tackle for a loss. That's wild card behavior. That's the definition of wild card behavior. And
Yeah, totally.
he's such an interesting pick because there's obviously a ton of talent there. The Chiefs didn't really need him this year until they needed him to play 7 snaps in the Super Bowl because Chris Jones, George Karlaftis, and Charles Omenihu when he was healthy, and Mike Dana. All of those guys were so good and so dominant. But there's always the possibility that obviously the Chiefs would hope for him to take on an expanded role, but there's a possibility the Chiefs will need him to take on an expanded role, depending on how the draft and free agency shake out. And I don't know. I really hesitate to read too much into, making a big play in the Super Bowl because we saw it with Darius Stoney and we saw it with Sky Moore last year.
Yes.
And, those were not indicators of future performance, unfortunately. But we can hope with FAU that these are signs of things to come, and it'll be interesting to see what he looks like when we get to Week 1, 2024.
I agree. It is really funny that if you think that the Chiefs just basically won the Super Bowl without use of their first round pick from last year, like that's that's silly. That's,
it is silly. That's crazy.
Just, you think about what they could have done if they had traded that pick before the draft, gotten
they could have won the Super Bowl, Taylor.
They could have, and yet they did. I will close us out with our final award of the 2023 football season with the most appropriate wild card that I can think of, which is the non-Rashee Rice wide receivers on this football team. I think if you boil down the Chiefs this year into one story that sticks out above the rest, one talking point, one group of players,
what we'll remember about this team.
What we will remember. It's almost like the year that Alex Smith went the whole year without throwing a touchdown to a wide receiver.
Sure.
Except these guys had all the opportunity to do it, and even though they screwed up early and often, and then when the game was on the line, when the playoffs were on the line, really, okay, so I'm talking, of course, about MVS, Hardman, and Justin Watson mainly. You could throw in some bit players here or there, but those are the 3 guys in this game that were non-Rashee Rice wide receivers that were wild cards because MVS caught a touchdown and Hardman caught a touchdown, the game-winning touchdown. And Justin Watson had 3 catches for 50 yards in this game, including, a couple monster ones. And all of those guys at some point or another, some of them more than others, but struggled. They struggled with the eye of the team on them, and with the media spotlight, and with their own struggles on the field with drops and blown stuff, and they all persevered when it mattered most. Now, I don't know if we'd be having the same conversation if the Chiefs had given Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore Super Bowl snaps, and maybe they would have. Maybe just like last year, maybe the 2 touchdowns, instead of being scored by MVS and Hardman, would have been scored by Toney and Sky. We'll never know. But the fact is that these are the guys that the Chiefs decided to rely on in the biggest game of the season, and they didn't let them down. And that's what I want to remember from this season, is not necessarily that the wide receivers sucked all year, but that when the games absolutely had to be taken, had to have them, these guys stepped up. They came through. And that's crazy. It's crazy that we're having this conversation in February after the conversations we had all season. I mean, frankly, this was at times the worst wide receiver group of any football team. I tweeted early on that I would have rather traded straight up the 3 Kansas football wide receivers for the 3 Chiefs starting wide receivers. And I was 100% serious. I think those guys actually would eat on this team. But the point being that they weren't good. And then when they had to be good, they were super wild card behavior.
Yeah, I mean, literally the most wild card behavior you could possibly have. Guys that were capable of anything. And man, when the light shined the brightest, somehow it was Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Mecole Hardman, and Justin Watson coming up with the biggest plays of the year. Boy, that's how you win a Super Bowl championship, ladies and gentlemen. And that's going to do it for our Super Bowl recap episode. It is the offseason. It's here. We will have free agency preview coming soon. That'll either be next week or the week after, because free agency starts in mid-March. So we got to get on that. We're going to have guests on to talk draft like we always do. We'll get some draft experts on to consult with us about that. And we'll have guests on to talk Super Bowl all offseason long, just like you heard last year, like what our niche in the podcast world, we do a few different buckets better than any other podcast, I'm convinced, in the Chiefs Kingdom podcasting space. One of those buckets is we really tear down other teams better than anybody else, and other teams' players better than anybody else. And
We do.
if you need somebody to do a hit job on John Elway or Tom Brady or Bill Belichick or some hated figure that is our enemy, we're here for you. And we will definitely be doing that throughout the offseason. We'll probably get a couple of roasts in there. That's a signature staple offseason content. But we also just like to celebrate what's good about being the Chiefs. And there's plenty of podcasts out there that have already switched over to full-time draft coverage, and that's great. And we'll probably have some of those people on to talk draft with us, and we'll get excited about the draft. But we're not going to lose sight of the fact that the Chiefs are Super Bowl champions, that the Chiefs are back-to-back Super Bowl champions. We will be celebrating that all offseason long. And we also have a fun little offseason project that we will be revealing at some point in the near future. We're not going to recap a season like we did last year. That 2003 season was kind of one of one. We couldn't think of another season that we really wanted to do that we had, a considerable amount of game footage for. But we have something better cooking up. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Stay with us. It's always sunny in Chiefs Kingdom. Till next time.